Gate duty was supposed to be a joke, a punishment assignment given to those considered invisible, insignificant, or unworthy of real operations, and that was exactly how the soldiers saw her that morning as she stood at the base entrance in a plain uniform, helmet tucked under her arm, checking IDs under the rising sun while laughter echoed behind her back, whispers spreading fast about how the girl had somehow ended up guarding the gate instead of training with the rest, jokes piling up as hours passed, bets placed on how long she'd last before breaking, because no one knew her name, no one knew her history, and no one bothered to ask, yet what they didn't see was the calm in her posture, the discipline in her movements, the quiet authority that came from years of command hidden beneath silence, because gate duty wasn't a punishment to her, it was observation, it was responsibility, it was control, and every vehicle that passed, every soldier that saluted lazily or ignored protocol, she noticed, memorized, logged away, until the atmosphere shifted suddenly when a black convoy approached without warning, engines low and heavy, flags tight against the wind, conversations dying mid-sentence as radios crackled and officers straightened their backs, because only one unit arrived like that, and when the lead vehicle stopped, the base commander rushed forward, expecting to greet the incoming SEAL commander, but before anyone else could react, the SEAL commander stepped out, boots hitting the ground with precision, eyes locking not on the officers waiting, not on the saluting guards but on her at the gate, and in a moment that froze the entire base, he came to a sharp halt, stood at full attention, and delivered a perfect salute directly to her, no hesitation, no explanation, just pure respect, and in that silence every joke shattered, because the most elite operator on the base had just acknowledged the person they mocked all day, confusion rippling through the ranks as the commander held the salute until she returned it calmly, professionally, as if this were routine, as if she belonged there because she did, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady and unmistakably authoritative, identifying herself not as a guard, not as temporary duty, but as the operational overseer sent to evaluate the base's readiness, discipline, and command integrity, the realization hitting like a shockwave as soldiers replayed their own behavior in their minds. The missed salutes, the careless jokes, the disrespect they hadn't realized was being recorded in real time, and as the SEAL commander briefed the base leadership, it became clear why he saluted first, because rank wasn't always worn on the sleeve, because leadership didn't always announce itself loudly, and because the person standing gate duty that day wasn't there to be seen, she was there to see them, and by the time the sun set, assignments were changed, commanders were corrected, careers quietly redirected, and the gate, the place they laughed at, became the symbol of the lesson they never forget, that respect isn't owed to position alone, it's owed to discipline, awareness, and the unseen authority that watches when you think no one important is looking. By the next morning, the base felt different, heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed what had happened at the gate, because news travels faster than orders in the military, and every soldier now knew that the quiet figure they mocked had been watching everything, and while no official announcement had been made yet, changes were already unfolding in subtle but unmistakable ways, patrol schedules rewritten overnight, inspections intensified, senior NCOs called into closed-door briefings they didn't emerge from smiling, and the soldiers who had laughed the loudest the day before now found themselves standing a little straighter, saluting a little sharper, replaying every careless word in their minds, because fear in the military isn't loud, it's procedural, and when the SEAL commander began his joint assessment with her at his side, walking the compound without escort, stopping randomly to question sentries, checking logs, weapons, response times, and even morale, it became clear she wasn't there to punish but to measure, and that made it worse, because measurement leaves no room for excuses, and as they moved from unit to unit, her questions were precise, surgical, never raised in volume but always cutting straight to the truth, asking why protocols were relaxed, why gate security relied on familiarity instead of verification, why junior soldiers felt comfortable mocking an assignment they clearly didn't understand, and every answer or hesitation was recorded, not on paper alone but in consequence, because by midday, the first corrections came down, quietly but firmly, a platoon sergeant reassigned, a training officer relieved, a commendation delayed indefinitely, and the soldiers began to understand that authority didn't need to shout to be absolute, and when she finally addressed the base in a closed formation, standing beside the SEAL commander rather than behind him, the message was unmistakable, as she spoke about duty not as glory but as vigilance, about how the gate was the first line of defense and the last place complacency should live, reminding them that every major breach in military history began with someone assuming nothing important would happen on their watch, and as she spoke, the same soldiers who had laughed now avoided eye contact, realizing the gate had been a test they didn't even know they were taking, and failed, yet what unsettled them most was what followed, because instead of announcing punishments, she announced standards, new ones, higher ones, ones that would require everyone from the newest private to the most senior officer to requalify, retrain, and re-earn positions they'd taken for granted. And when someone finally asked who she really was, her response was calm, almost understated, as she explained she'd commanded joint operations where a single ignored checkpoint had cost lives, that she'd buried soldiers whose last mistake was trusting someone who didn't take gate duty seriously, and that silence afterward wasn't fear anymore, it was understanding, and by the time the SEAL convoy prepared to leave, the base no longer watched her with curiosity or doubt, but with something far heavier, respect earned the hard way, because the joke had ended, the lesson had landed, and the soldiers now knew that sometimes the most powerful person on the base isn't the one giving orders from headquarters, but the one standing quietly at the gate, watching who you really are when you think no one important is looking. Days passed, but the weight of her presence never truly left the base, even after the SEAL convoy disappeared beyond the horizon, because the changes she set in motion kept unfolding with mechanical precision, drills starting earlier, inspections running longer, and mistakes no longer brushed aside with jokes or excuses, as if the base itself had been rewired to remember what discipline actually meant, and the soldiers who once laughed at gate duty now found themselves assigned therein. Rotating shifts, not as punishment but as education, forced to experience the stillness, the responsibility, and the pressure of being the first and last barrier between safety and catastrophe, and some of them began to understand, standing alone in the dark with only the hum of generators and distant desert wind for company, how quickly boredom could turn into vulnerability, how easy it was to miss a detail when your mind drifted, and how unforgiving that mistake could be, and it was during one of those nights that the lesson became real, when an unmarked supply truck approached the gate outside scheduled hours, its paperwork technically correct but its timing wrong by just enough to raise questions, and the young soldier on duty hesitated, remembering her words about familiarity being the enemy of security, choosing to follow procedure instead of convenience, delaying entry, calling it in, and unknowingly triggering a chain of events that would ripple through the entire command. Because when the truck was searched under full protocol, hidden compartments were discovered, nothing explosive, nothing dramatic, but enough unauthorized equipment to expose a serious internal breach, proof that complacency had already opened a door long before she arrived, and by dawn, investigators were on site, quietly unraveling months of ignored red flags, forged authorizations, and relaxed oversight that traced back to leadership failures rather than individual error, and as the truth surfaced, the base understood something unsettling. If she hadn't stood that gate, if she hadn't been mocked and underestimated, that truck would have passed without question. The breach would have deepened, and consequences far worse would have followed, and when the official report circulated days later, her name appeared only once, buried in a line crediting preliminary security assessment, yet everyone on base knew who had changed their trajectory, and the final blow came when a sealed directive arrived from higher command, restructuring the base's leadership entirely, not as punishment but as correction, and as outgoing officers packed their offices, the new commanders addressed the formation with a message she had left behind, reminding them that real leadership is revealed in the smallest assignments, in the moments no one is watching, and in the discipline to do the right thing even when it feels insignificant. And long after she was gone, long after new routines became normal, the gate remained different, treated not as a joke but as a position of trust, because the soldiers had learned the truth the hard way that respect doesn't come from who salutes you first, but from whether you're worthy of the salute when it